So I'm very pleased to introduce Lorraine Medici, who is the Director of Training and Development at Express Employment Professionals. She has extensive experience as a coach and a workshop facilitator in the areas of leadership and team building, and she works closely with companies on engagement and retention strategies. She's certified in DISC and Emotional Intelligence and an approved training partner with the Human Resource Certification Institute, or as we all know it, HRCI. So Lorraine, welcome, thank you, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Jan. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon to everybody else in the rest of the country. Very honored to be able to talk about this very important topic that we are talking about today, and that's really looking at increasing employee engagement. It's very impactful. I thought it would just be important for me to share with all of you, however, why would a staffing agency even be talking about this particular topic. We have kind of a unique opportunity in our industry to be hearing both sides of the story as to what the workplace and the workforce are going through. And so part of having that unique position, we also felt it's important to be part of the solution. So as the Director of Training and Development, this is something I hear almost on a daily basis. Is, number one, where is everybody? I'm sure a lot of you out there are probably struggling to find talent, but also really looking at turnover as a critical piece to the bottom dollar. So today's purpose is really threefold. We're going to discuss the impact of employee disengagement. We're going to talk about identifying the factors that influence employee engagement. And then we're also going to look at strategies. As a coach, I'll just let you know it's very important to me that you walk away with some nugget of information that you can take back to your position, to your department, to your organization, that you can really use moving forward. So, excuse me, as we go through this, I know that you have the opportunity to ask questions, which we will be happy to answer towards the end of the program. So one of the things I talk to a lot of companies about is what's the difference between being engaged versus being motivated. And I think it's important to kind of just put out a definition, if you will. And when we look at engagement, it's really the active agreement to do something for someone. However, motivation is more the will to do something. So here we can have a little bit of an issue. I can be engaged to help out a coworker because it's expected of me. And when we look at that, what we're really talking about is a low level of engagement. Versus I can engage with my coworker to help because I enjoy teaching, mentoring, and helping my coworker out. In this case, what we would see is somebody who has a much higher level of engagement and motivation. And so what I really want you to walk away with today is that engagement is not something we do, but it's something that we are. So just really kind of let that sink in. It's something that we are. We focus too often on just doing the doing and not recognizing that it has also, in a greater part, have to do with who we are and why we do it. At this moment, I want to just take a moment to share a story. If anybody has read or keeps up to what's going on with Simon Sinek, he has a book out there called Leaders Eat Last. And in that particular book, it talks about companies who are highly engaged, and one of them is the Costco Corporation. And I personally did kind of a social experiment, if you will, to look at why is this company noted for their high engagement. And I asked people almost every time I go in there, I try to pick an unsuspecting victim and ask them why they like working at Costco. And it always comes down to they take care of us. They have our back. I love working here. So there's something to that, and it really does feed the engagement process. So today what we're going to really look at is 3 types of engagement and understand the different levels, address the gaps, and really look at some of the seriousness of the disengagement. So let's look at what an engaged employee, this is the first level of engagement, is an employee who works with passion, feels a profound connection to their company, and they drive innovation and move the organization forward. You'll see that there's two statistics down there, and this statistic has really not changed much in the last 7 to 8 years, and it's really quite alarming that 33% of workers in the United States are at this level where they feel a profound connection to their company, where they can be innovative and really have a voice in what's going on. Worldwide, look at that statistic. That's just absolutely alarming when you think 13%. So when you think that out of 10 people, 7 people are at some level of disengagement, we have some real issues to work on for sure. So what does engagement really mean, and what does it look like? And just looking at some of these words here, I just want you to take a moment to let them kind of sit with you, because it's much more than having yearly picnics, throwing a great Christmas party, or a year-end party. Engagement is much deeper, much more binding. Look at those words. It has a greater involvement. It's really bringing people together. And so when you think about looking at your own company's view of engagement, we really have to understand that it involves everything from the very top, what the leaders see as engagement, their involvement with their people, the participation in their employees' development, and really looking at the organization as a whole. And what happens then is when you do have events, they become much more valuable, much more meaningful. The second type of engagement is actually called a disengaged employee. Employees are essentially checked out. They're sleepwalking through their workday. They're putting time in, but they don't have the energy or passion into their work. And so we see that 50% of that 70% that are disengaged are actually at this level, where they're just kind of putting their time in and are actually passively looking for work, which is even scarier. I want to move on to this next slide here because I want to talk a little bit what does that actually mean when you're talking about disengagement, because it really can be a spectrum. It can be as low as, somebody who gets in at 5 minutes to 8 and leaves at, 5:02. They're just doing what they need to do, staying underneath the radar, not taking a whole lot of initiative where you would hope that someone would do more of that. And again, one of the things I always say is a disengaged employee at this level is they're there, but they're not there, right? So they've really lost a lot of their passion in their job. An actively disengaged employee is a whole different banana here. This is someone who is unhappy and unproductive at work and liable to spread negativity to workers. And again, this percentage of 17.2% is the group that we're talking about that really now are very toxic for your organization. You're going to spend a little bit more time on the cost of the actively disengaged, but you're going to have a greater impact on your bottom dollar when these folks are not really addressed with whatever is going on in their life. And there's a company out there called Fierce Company, and they shared some stats that I recently heard about, and I wanted to share those with you today. Some of the reasons why you're going to see people in this category stems from that 56% of this group that Fierce Company surveyed said that they see no opportunity for career advancement. 60% say that their current job takes a toll on their life, their overall life, especially when it comes to things like mandated overtime, too much overtime, working on the weekends, etc. And what's really astonishing to me is that 70% felt that on average it took 3 months before they heard a positive or encouraging praise or recognition to their work. So again, we're looking at things that really cause these people to feel like they're not only disengaged but actively disengaged. And then what I kind of want to do is get to the second part, which really talks about the impact of disengagement. It really is a crisis. It's not just a crisis here in the United States, but it is a global crisis. As you can see, 13% worldwide are engaged in their job. When we're talking about cost, productivity being hindered, customer relationships that we're losing because we have employees that are not engaged, we're looking at $450 to $550 billion a year lost because of this level of disengagement. And those kind of numbers are just so hard to wrap your mind around, and I'm actually going to show you here momentarily what that looks like in numbers that we can really look at. And so we're looking at earnings that are being lost, employee bonuses that are being affected, morale. I mean, morale is huge. Morale is really what is going to brand who you are, and what you do every day. And that morale, even though it's hard sometimes to actually see it as a tangible return, it is something that spreads like wildfire, and I think we all have probably experienced that one way or another. And then the cost of retention. Retention is crazy, and it's lost money. It is money that you cannot get back. And again, lastly, we were talking about branding. So when you think about being an employer of choice, that so many of you who are listening today are part of this amazing organization, these kinds of things, this level of disengagement can really, really change how people see you as an employer. Interesting little chart here that you can look at, Gallup's 2013 versus 2016 report. You can see that there has been a little bit of a shift to more to the positive. In 2016, you see that engagement has gone up, disengagement has gone down just 1%, and actively disengagement has gone down 3%. Not big numbers, so they are still saying it's still much more of an issue, and these numbers are not really reflecting things that are going in a real positive manner. So let's look at the cost of actively disengaged at numbers that you and I can really equate to. When we look at a $10,000 of salary, okay, it costs $3,400 for that actively disengaged employee. You think about a $60,000 employee who's actively disengaged, it's now costing you $20,400. I mean, that is a tremendous amount of money when you think that that's one person. You multiply that by however many else might be in that group. Here's an example of how we can look at it as a workforce, and again, it's just to kind of really hone in the cost of disengagement. You take a workforce of 200 people. We know that 17.2% of them are going to be actively disengaged. So in this example here, 34 out of the 200 in a general way could be at that level. If you take a median salary of $60,000, that's a loss of $20,400 per person, and look at that number, $693,600 for those 34 people that are actively disengaged. And you know, we're not just talking about money here. We're not talking about just the sole fact, again, that it's that large of an amount. Again, it's your branding. It speaks of who you are as an organization and of a people. And when you think of the fact that 40% of our waking hours are spent at our jobs, 60% of our waking hours are doing some aspect of our job, whether it's driving back and forth, checking emails. We recognize that we really have to make a change of what engagement looks like. Excuse me. Here again is another interesting statistic at 30,000, taking it down for a little bit lower cost. So to replace somebody at 30,000 at 16% of their salary, you can see that it's almost $4,000 to replace somebody at that level. 30 to 50,000, we're talking 20%. And again, I think that these numbers are so helpful for us to really recognize that if we could even change it, 25%, what will be the impact of that change possibly towards bonuses, to earnings, et cetera. Hiring new people, right? I mean, all of those things are critical in the way we look at that. So what I want to do is kind of shift a little bit and look at factors that actually influence engagement and really start to get our minds wrapped around what we can do once we recognize what are the problems that we have in our own organizations so that we can really be much more proactive than reactive. Some of you may have heard of the Gallup's Q12. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that. I actually think from a coaching perspective, as a coach when I work with folks that are doing professional development, personal development, we really key in on a lot of these particular elements that I'm going to go through here one by one, and I think they're critical. And what I love about this is something that you really can take back to your organizations and just start working on one-on-one to try to identify what elements we need to improve on as an organization, as a department, as a team. And so a lot of times in talking to companies, a lot of companies will say, what's out there? You know, what kind of surveys are out there? And there's several of them. There is a survey out there called AMP, which measures attachment, motivation, and performance, which is really an amazing tool to use because it's something that you can track quickly. You can put focus on how you will coach and develop those people who are struggling. But here's the key. Too many times companies will throw out some kind of an engagement survey and the employees never hear anything back. And I think that is one of the things that is really difficult because if you're going to put something out there, the people want to hear. So it's important to be very transparent and help understand what's going on. So in this first round here, what we have is Level 1, we call this Level 1, and this is the primal needs. Every employee is really looking at, what is it that I get out of this job? And it really does kind of come down to things like money, benefits, what are the expectations that others have of me? So when we talk about a question that says, do you know what is expected of you at work, what we're really talking about there is role clarification. And if you're taking notes, I encourage you to kind of write that down. I cannot tell you how often in my series, we have a series called Purpose-Driven Leadership Training, and I have leaders from all levels who are with me for 8 weeks, that this is probably the number one thing is I don't always have a clear idea of what my role is and what are the boundaries. So this is primal. This is important for people to be successful, to set others up for success, to know what their role is. The second question here says, do you have the materials and equipment to do your work right? And so again, what we're talking about here is, do I have the resources to be successful? As a leader, do my people have the resources to be successful? If they don't, what does it take to get them? Okay, so again, this is kind of a Level 1 look at the 12 elements of Gallup's Q12. The second level, Level 2, is what do I bring to the table, is really looking at it about what do you see in me? What is it that I'm doing? What are the skills that I have that you see value in? And really looking at having that self-worth and self-esteem. And there's four questions that fall under this particular level, as in what do I bring to the table. And when we look at question number 3 here, at work do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every day? What they're basically asking of you is, are you leveraging my strengths? We all know that people will excel, they will do greater things, they will have greater impact when they are doing things that they do well naturally. It's something that becomes like a second nature for them. And so we want to leverage people's strengths as much as we can. In question number 4, it says, in the last 7 days, have you received recognition or praise for doing good work? Again, everybody wants to be recognized. Everybody wants an attaboy once in a while, and to be recognized that what they're doing has value, that it is impacting the team, the department, whatever. A lot of times what I'll encourage leaders to do is to make sure that you try not to be so vague about your praise or your recognition. I think it's really important to bring it down to say, hey, last week I noticed that you stayed late a couple of hours to help another team get where they needed to go. I mean, that is amazing, and I want you to know that I saw that, but not only that I saw that, but other team members saw that. What kind of impact do you think that is for those around you who saw that kind of initiative that you took? So those kind of questions get people recognized for what they're doing, but also recognizing that they are modeling really great behavior. Question number 5 says, does your supervisor or someone at work seem to care about you as a person? So again, what we're talking about here is, do I feel valued? Do I feel valued not only in what I do, but the connections that I make, and does my leader see value in me? So I think, again, it seems very simplistic, but it's amazing how many people will say, this is something that I really wish that once in a while I would be recognized for that, or told, hey, the kind of work that you're doing is really having an impactful role. Question number 6, again, is still under what do I bring to the table, is there someone at work who encourages my development? And it's really true. It's not a generational question that just millennials want to be developed. We all want to be developed. But it is true that one of the things that you do hear much more from the millennial generation, who is the biggest generation now in the workforce, is they definitely want a career path. They want to know what's coming up next. But I think if you asked anybody, in order for personal and professional development, having an organization that really honors that and sees the impact of that is critical. Okay, let's look now on the next level. Level 3 is, do I belong here? And what Gallup is really looking for here is this person a good cultural fit? But from me as an employee standpoint, do I feel that I'm a good fit here based on my own value systems? Do my values align with the corporation? So when we ask about questions like, at work, do your opinions seem to count? What we're talking about here now is, do I have a voice? And organizations that promote hearing what the employees have to say actually have shown over and over that engagement is higher. People understand that I might be able to share my opinion, but it may not be looked at, or the final decision may not go with how I see it. But the fact that you ask me my opinion has value, and that means something to me. So, and you may, for those of you who know 5 dysfunctions of a team, that is critical, is that everybody should be able to have a voice in what they're saying or doing. The next question, does the mission purpose of your company make you feel your job is important? And so what we're really talking about here is purpose, really talking about what I do every day, does it hold a purpose? And I thought I'd share a story with you. One of the companies that I've done some training for in the past, I was talking to a supervisor of a manufacturing plant who had been there for about 30 years, and very, very astute leader who was kind of quiet behind the scenes, but so into her people, really, really recognizing her people. She had a gentleman who had been on her team for about 70 days, and in this particular instance, he had quite a few marks against him, and in this company, there was an X amount of marks before you would be let go. He was 2 away from being let go, and this gal Sue approached John and said, John, hey, listen, the way things look like, it doesn't seem like you're going to be here much longer because of all the marks that you have. And she asked him, what's going on? His response was, I really hate working 7 to 3. And she said, well, that's a pretty typical, shift in manufacturing. So what I want to ask you is, what is the real issue that's bothering you? And what he came out and said was, I just don't feel like what I do every day really makes a difference. I get that this part that I'm making is important, but I just don't feel purposeful. She said, what would you like to do? And he said, I'd like to work over there in that other department. That looks exciting. It looks like something that I could really wrap my head around. And so what Sue did was she moved him into that department with the contingency that he not have any more marks for another 90 days. The short part of that story is not only did he not miss anything, he moved into that department and became supervisor. So again, we are looking at how important we feel our purpose is in our jobs. The ninth question there says, are your associates or your fellow employees committed to doing quality work? And so what we're talking about there is, do I feel that there's integrity and teamwork where I'm at? Do others have my back, and do I have theirs because the team is strong and we think like one? Or do we have this kind of silo effect where people are all kind of doing their own thing and chatting and gossiping, which is creating a very toxic environment? The 10th question says, do you have a best friend at work? It sounds maybe a little elementary or silly, but it's really important. We're talking about camaraderie, aren't we? The connection that we have. And human beings are meant to connect. It's just that simple. And so am I in a place where I do feel a connection with others every day when we're going to work? The fourth level here is, how can we all grow? And it's really looking at what is the potential for my own personal and professional development. Do I have that career pathway that helps me move forward? And I want to talk about these last two here, but look at it a little bit from a generational point of view. In the last 6 months, question number 11, has someone at work talked to you about your progress? And so what we're talking about here is individual goals. Are you setting up others for success with individual goals? Because from that, what you can a lot of times find out is what motivates that person and what is it that they can do next. So as a baby boomer myself, one of the things that I hear a lot of times from other baby boomers is they're doing a lot of clock watching. And it's like 5 more years, 7 more years, 10 more years, that kind of thing. And unlike the millennials who are looking for this great career path, one of the things that I always encourage baby boomers is, what do you want your legacy to be when you leave 7, 10, 15 years from now? What is it that you want people to say about your leadership or the way that you worked with others? And so I think not only do baby boomers need to be thinking about that, I think everybody who's entering the workforce needs to be thinking about, what is it that I'm going to set out for myself that could influence and help others to be successful. And that last question, in the last year, have you had opportunities to learn and grow? Again, what we're talking about is training. And, a lot of times training dollars are hard to give up because there's always another machine to get or another person to hire. But we know that it's critical that training be a part of your culture so that you can develop your people to be the best. I mean, it really comes down to the same thing when we think about our kids, Our children always need to be continually taught, whether it's from school or learning lessons in life. And if we stop growing, we really sort of become toxic ourselves and kind of flatline. So really be thinking about, what does my training look like in my organization? So I want to just add this. A few slides here are called Wired for Engagement. And as you can see from this slide, it says I work for a great company, I have a great boss, I'm happy where I'm at, no problem, I can help you out. All these great kinds of statements that you would hear people make who are so engaged in what they do. And so when employees are engaged, they are likely to say good things about your company. The leadership will influence others to grow, and they will also help them learn to be better problem solvers. One of the biggest things I also hear from leaders is that I am so tired of always being the fireman. And I'm like, then stop being the fireman and be the fire chief. Seriously, if you want to set up others to be successful, you have to help others become problem solvers of their own issues. And yes, at times that means you may have to be the fire chief, but really understanding that a true leader that promotes engagement is always going to be the person that helps develop their people. So when people are engaged, they're likely to stay. It reduces turnover costs. It increases morale. It speaks again of your branding, and it becomes, again, that statement that you hear as an employer of choice. And when we are employees that are engaged, what do we do naturally? We work harder. We want to do our best. We want to be better team players, and we want to go above and beyond. So again, what we want to think about is how do we get that person to say those things and feel those things. And so there was an interesting study done that showed even when you have a culture of engagement, there still seems to be about 25% of employees that still just don't fit the mold. And this occurred in a large part because of the hiring practice of not looking at interpersonal skills. And I know that today's topic is not on that, but just to give you a little bit of context, this was one of the things that we were constantly hearing is with this high turnover, how can we identify what's actually going on? And frankly, I was able to really see that there's three things that really can influence turnover tremendously in a more positive way. And that's hiring practices, onboarding, and engagement. So today's session obviously is just about engagement. But again, this 25% of employees that just don't quite fit the mold, we can a lot of times attribute it back to the interviewing process where we're not asking the right questions for interpersonal skills. Here's an interesting statistic for you to write down and remember, because it really is pretty amazing. 70% of the time we hire people because of their hard skills. And 70% of the time, we let people go because of their soft skills or their interpersonal skills. I really don't like the word soft skills. I think interpersonal skills we're talking about human beings. And so we're not even interviewing correctly. We're interviewing at a level of hard skills, but we're not really getting people and knowing who they are on their interpersonal skills. So this gap that we looked at, the company Aon.com did a study to say there are certain people that are just wired to be engaged. They are just naturally positive. They are naturally cooperative, and they have a drive, which is sort of a discretionary effort in how they apply their motivation. And they are people that like to work together. They face conflict well together. They don't typically struggle to connect with others. And their positivity is really kind of a level of optimism, even in the face of stress and conflict. And so knowing this right here today might give you some good opportunity to think about how can I maybe interview differently to find out about these three areas of positivity. And as a coach, one of the things I always throw this tip out, which is a very, very simple thing to do, and it's amazing how honest people will be, is to ask them to rank themselves on a scale of 1 to 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, overall, 10 being, I am generally always positive, where would you put yourself on that scale? And if somebody rates themselves a 6, it allows you then to ask more questions about that. Give me an example why you give yourself a 6 versus, let's say, an 8 or a 4. It would be good for those kind of questions to learn more about that person. Same thing with cooperativeness and drive. It just adds to understanding who you're potentially bringing into your culture. In our last section here, I want to talk about strategies, and because this is so critical so that all of you today can walk away with something that might just, even if it gets you into a discussion mode of helping you think more strategically about having a culture of engagement as a top strategic priority and really aligning all facets of your organization. Some of those engagement strategies could be assessments. I mentioned 1 or 2 earlier, but the second one that I'm going to talk about, the selection, which I just kind of alluded to, is what does our interviewing and onboarding look like? Do we need to revamp it? Even more so is everybody consistently interviewing the same? Or do we have different people interviewing so different that it's causing people to come on board to your culture that might not be the right fit? And so, again, what we want to look at are those things. The other thing that I think is a very important part of engagement strategy is leadership. And I can't speak enough about that. The number one reason that somebody's going to stay or leave your organization is the direct relationship they have with their immediate supervisor. So let me say that again. The number one reason why somebody stays or leaves your organization is the direct relationship they have with their immediate supervisor. It's not generally because of money or benefits or the CEO or even coworkers. It's the relationship that I have with my immediate supervisor. And what's so interesting in doing so much training of leaders, how many leaders have got their position because they've been, for example, an amazing welder. This welder who's been working for 10, 12 years at a company gets tapped on the shoulder one day and says, hey, we so appreciate all that you do in welding. We would love to promote you to a leadership position, which from the company's point of view, they feel good about, and it's not inherently bad. But the problem with so many times when we move people and shift people into leadership positions is probably the only position that we really never train for. We move people because they were good at something, but not necessarily at being a leader. And I think that really does not set up people to be successful. So if I have a leader who has never really been trained on what it means to understand their own influence, understand their own emotional intelligence when they're stressed, understand how to communicate masterfully, how to ask questions, what you have is a leader that potentially can have people who report to them be disengaged and only really talk to leaders when they have to. So I really stress how important it is to look at your leadership and ask, are they set up to be not only influential leaders, but leaders that will promote engagement and not disengagement in doing what you need to do to make a successful company? So looking here on this next slide, we have Gallup's Q12 again, these elements. And this is such a really easy way to start discussions. Just by looking at the 12, you could definitely go ahead and use this survey in your organizations, or maybe you even want to try it in your teams, to get feedback, which I definitely encourage you to do. And when you get feedback, presumably you're going to have some areas that are going to be some soft spots where we go, wow, you know what? We did not get a whole lot back from people feeling valued. Or maybe you have a high percentage of people saying, I just don't feel like I have a really strong role clarification. And so when we look at those things, we now can start having conversations to say, what can we do differently? What do we need strategically to do to change the way we talk about role clarification so that we can strengthen our leaders, that there's no misunderstanding about what your role is, or feeling valued, or understanding what your individual goals are. And so, again, I think this is a simple but very doable means in which to start looking at how these 12 elements really do affect engagement, and seeing right off the top what are those soft spots that we can be working on, and really taking an active role in making a difference on what you do. And so just a little bit before we maybe open these up to some questions here, is the strategy objective is to ensure that each employee has all the available resources to perform the job. And I don't mean necessarily those physical resources, but what I'm really talking about are these 12 elements, these resources right here. Are your employees equipped and have access to all of these elements? Are they fulfilled in understanding that, yes, you do have a voice? And you know what? There's going to be times where we definitely hear you, and there's going to be other times where we appreciate what you have to say, but we've had to go into another direction. So when we think about action steps, we're really thinking about meeting with leaders to review each of the positions and resources and looking at those elements and taking a step back to go, where can we go better? What could we do differently to help people feel more fulfilled, which then transfers into a much deeper level of engagement. I put number 2 here, to meet with the controller, because of course, companies don't have endless budgets. And so I think it's important that you get creative with your leaders to say, what is it that we can do, and are there resources that we might have to purchase to help with engagement. And then, again, doing that regroup, coming back 6 months maybe later and going, what's changed, what's gone better. But I think in order to have a very strategic, positive change in your engagement, you have to be on this all the time. It cannot be a once a year kind of event that we do by throwing out a survey of some kind. It has to be something that is part of who you are as an organization, that when people hear your name, when employees feel good about the fact that they love where they work, they're going to spread that all the time, just like people will spread negative things about their company, their leaders, when things are not right. So again, I think engagement is so much bigger than activities that we might do, but really looking at it at a far, far deeper level in which to change the outlook for your company. And just kind of wrapping up before we take some questions here, again, what we did today, and it's kind of at a 20,000-foot view, is we looked at the 3 different kinds of engagement. We talked about what an engaged person looks like, that very passionate person who loves the work that they do and is connected to their leader, their company. We looked at disengaged people, and again, 70% of our workforce in all industries are at some level of disengagement. And that should be a frightful number for all of us to really take heart and to really be much more active in what we're going to do moving forward. And looking at that disengagement are those folks that are doing what they need to do, kind of staying under the radar, not making a whole lot of ruckus, but just doing what they need to get by. And again, they're there, but they're not there. Out of that 70%, 51% of the people are passively looking for other work. So the question is, how is that affecting your customers? How is that affecting your bottom line, productivity, your vision, your goals every year? It really can ask a lot of questions to help you get to the next step. And then that third level of engagement, what we call the actively disengaged. And this is where you have folks who are now very toxic and causing a lot of issues, possibly pulling people, and not really making any waves about how they feel. The second thing we talked about was the impact, the cost, the incredible burden, $450 to $550 billion a year in the United States, and the loss to your bottom line, the loss to your reputation, to your branding, all of that. I mean, it's incredibly impactful. And then the third part was really looking at how you could use Gallup's Q12 in a more productive way to really be able to assess where are those soft areas where we can look and be much more proactive in being a culture that really understands engagement at a deeper level and makes our employees not only feel valued, but that their voice is heard, that they do understand what their roles are, that they are leveraging their strengths, that they are being recognized from time to time for what they're doing, that they feel that they have a purpose, they are part of something bigger than themselves, a team that works well together, that thinks as one, and is involved in their own personal growth for individual goals and training. So if I can leave you with anything on that, I highly recommend that you do take the time to look up the Gallup's Q12 and start a conversation and see what you can do to make some small changes and move forward to really engage. The most important asset that you have in your organization are your people. So with that, Jan, I think I'll stop here and see if there are any questions. I'm so happy to be able to try to answer for you.
Thanks so much, Lorraine. This was fabulous. And I will reinforce the work of the Gallup 12 and how how it's endured over, at least 15 years, hasn't it been?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, it works well. It's simple, right? It's easy to use, and I just think there's so much empowering opportunities from that.
And especially share it with your employees, I think, too.
Exactly. Right.
I'll also endorse the Companion Strengths Finders. It changed how I approached performance reviews 180 degrees when I looked at what the employees' needs were rather than what my need to communicate was. What does this person need to feel? All of those things in their job.
Mm-hmm. And that's so critical, especially if you can get your team, Jan, right, and you do individual strength finders and then pull it together as a group. Just think about how much more engagement there is from that alone, knowing that now I understand a lot more about my own coworker, and I don't have to feel so much resentment because I now have understanding. Same thing with even doing a DISC assessment. All of those things say to people that I want to know who you are, and I want to understand so I can leverage not only your strengths but communicate better with you, and it really now starts to speak the branding of your company.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you something else. It's not a bad thing to do with families. Especially
I already got my 2 sons.
Especially where you have teenagers and adult children all living together in the same home. Where is this person coming from?
Exactly.
I also loved your comment on we hire for hard skills and we fire for soft skills, even though I said, like you said, you don't like the soft skills.
Yeah.
But that happens too often, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, rarely. I have to tell you, when I talk to hundreds of people every year, and those are the questions. Tell me about your turnover. Tell me what are some of your biggest issues. Rarely do I have people say, you know what, I struggle with people who just don't know how to do their welding job or their admin job. What I hear about is people don't know how to handle stress. People don't know how to communicate well. There's infighting. There's people who just, they only want to do what they want to do. And so what we're talking about is interpersonal skills, and we don't spend enough time in recognizing that you are bringing this person into your family. I mean, every organization is a family at some point, and to ignore those things is really harming the branding and who you are as a company. So it's crucial to take time in the interviewing process and ask behavioral-based questions. Tell me a time when you had a big issue with a coworker. How did you handle that in the past? Tell me a time when your boss was very unapproachable and you felt nervous about approaching them. How did you handle that? Those kind of questions are so much more important than even the hard skill questions, because you can actually see if somebody can do a job. So those are some of the things that I do a lot of training on, is really revamping the interviewing part to really kind of weed out those people that you can see are probably just not going to be a good culture fit.
Yep. Hire slow, fire fast.
There you go.
This is what we
right,
say in
we always hear the saying. We hear the saying, maybe this person is not, a right person to be on your bus. But then it's not only just to be on your bus, but do you have the right people and the right seats on your bus?
Yes.
And that's what you're talking about, Jan, with the Strengths Finder, right? Is how am I leveraging people so they're sitting in the right area that's going to be such a powerful impact for the organization, which then leads again back to higher levels of engagement.
Right. And I also appreciated your, as a baby boomer, are we looking at what legacy we're leaving? Because I unfortunately, say I am counting down the days, years, months to the end of my full-time career. And this leads into one of my comments to the group, too. My legacy is the peer groups that we are forming here through Best and Brightest Companies. And when I email all of you after the program, I'll put a link to our peer group programs, and you can see in the cities where we are forming them for HR professionals to learn from each other. So I'm proud of that legacy. So I hope everyone else has that kind of thing too. We do have a question.
Sure.
Besides the DISC assessment, what is it that you recommend to determine work personalities to help that approach and appropriately?
So that's a great question, and if I can just kind of give a little bit of my own personal opinion on different assessments, I think sometimes we put a little bit too much emphasis on one or another particular assessment, and the way I try to work with leaders is to recognize you should take several different assessments, because each assessment is sort of a puzzle piece to who you are, but it is not one that defines who you are. So when we talk about DISC assessment, I think it's a wonderful assessment to help people understand what their natural proclivities are for communicating, how they deal with rules and procedures, how they deal with whether it's task or people-oriented. So I think that's helpful. I think an assessment like an AccuMax is a really great one too, where you have a very defined role clarification, and you need to have somebody that really follows along that line. There are so many different ones. Strengths Finders I think is interesting. I'm not sure how helpful always it is for, I wouldn't put my full stamp of approval to say, oh, this is going to be a great person for this fit. However, I do see it being a tremendous asset when you really look at the skill set of what that job describes, and I mean hard skills and interpersonal skills, to recognize how do those strengths, how will they be leveraged. So I'm not sure if that helps you, but I think it's important. There's a lot of, for instance, the one assessment that I mentioned, AMP, which is, there's some companies that really, really are strong in promoting attachment and motivation in their job descriptions, and so that particular assessment would be a good link for that. The other one, just real quick, is emotional intelligence. I can't say enough about that. That is going to be one that would really give me, if I was hiring somebody, especially in a very high-stress job, a very good indicator to say how does somebody deal with conflict and stress. So.
A follow-up to that is, are these free assessments or specific websites you need to purchase from?
You can find some kind of watered-down DISC assessments online. I probably would not recommend those. There's several different companies that provide DISC assessments. Most of them all use the same algorithms. I particularly like People Keys, and I use that just because you get 3 different graphs back, and those graphs really kind of talk about how the person sees themselves, how they believe others see themselves, and then how they look under stress. So, and they're relatively inexpensive. So that's the one that I use for all my leaders in my training courses.
All right, cool. I know Strengths Finders, again, and I agree with you, using that internally rather than for screening potential employees. But Strengths Finders is what, $12 for the book. So, and then you get a key to take the online test.
Exactly.
I know that the DISC that we administered in my previous job was sometimes for the full thing was $400. So it just depends on what level you're doing and who you're using to interpret the results too. I mean, you can't just taking the test and not knowing how to use the results. I would always recommend that you use someone like Lorraine to interpret those.
And I think that's true, sure.
One of our listeners said they use Profile XT assessment, and it's a great tool that they've used. So yeah, there's lots of them, and I would definitely say there's use your trusted advisors to come up with the best one for your organization. So
absolutely,
looks like
and experience it yourself. If you experience it yourself, you'll have a better idea of what to expect. Yep.
Exactly. So I want to remind you that this program is being recorded and will be available on the Best and Brightest website, that you will receive an evaluation from me on SurveyMonkey, where you will indicate your request for continuing education credit. So if there are no other comments or questions, Lorraine, any last words?
Thank you so much, Janet. Privileged to be able to present this very important information. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to help you. My information is up there because I really believe this is such a critical key to being a successful leader and in an organization. So thank you again, Jan.
Well, thank you so very much. We really appreciate you providing this information to our listeners. So that's the end of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.